Hey everybody, Zeal Brothers here once again. Want to make another video. This one in response to a comment I received on a video that was entitled, Study Shows Most Christians Don't Have Values That Align with the Bible. And one of the persons who responded had the screen name Jenna. And this is what she said. No, Christians only know they hope to go to heaven, even though their own Bible says they will not. Deuteronomy 4:40. They don't have biblical literacy, and the only parts they know, and I was one for more years than enough, are the pretty parts. Paul in the same cycle of the allowable topics year over year. They never have to contend with the actual Bible as it regards genocide. They never confront the commandment of their God, who is also Jesus, for a people group to ritually mutilate the newborn boys' penises to express a covenant that an infant cannot consent to, and that Egypt is already doing. It makes me wonder how anyone would even see it unless they drop trowel. They don't understand that the Bible has been added to and maimed in translation to support doctrine instead of the other way around. I'm glad for that study. It shows the church is on its way to being a dusty relic on the shelves of history where it belongs. And premarital sex begs the question of what is a marriage? The word matrimony comes from mater, mother. So when a woman got pregnant, that whole virgin knockup doesn't happen to everybody. So somebody was in bed before marital status began for that word to exist as a synonym for being married. The church wasn't interested in marriage until the 11th century. So they would see who the bastards were that the good Christian men were making with their sisters, cousins, working girls, and the household help to throw those out of the church. Up till then, people took the housekeeping, often but not always with a party in the community. All the wedding stuff, cakes, rings, signs of being owned. Flowers and vows are pagan, by the way. So this is the comment that I'll be responding to. All right, now for all you atheists out there, and maybe it's a few of you guys who watch this video, this is what we got to contend with when we theists put our opinions out there. We have somebody who is rambling like this, and they just put all their emotions in these posts. And so I just wanted to respond to this point by point. And the first one is, she says, no, Christians only know they hope to go to heaven, even though their own Bible says they will not. And then she quotes Deuteronomy 4:40. Now, Deuteronomy 4:40 has nothing to do with going to heaven. Nothing at all. I'm not even sure where she got this from. I looked up 1440. I looked up 2440. None of these got anything to do with anything that she's talking about. So the first thing that she do is she dropped a reference. Maybe she thought nobody was going to check it and just take her word for it. But oftentimes, this is what atheists do. I've had people say, well, these are the list of the verses that have contradictions in the Bible. And all they do is Google it and just get a link that says these are contradictory verses. Then they just post that, right? And they don't look it up themselves. So then when you look it up and you say, none of these verses contradict each other, they just hope you wouldn't do enough work to check on them. They just wanted to put you on a defensive and make you have to go around and scramble. So the first thing she do right off the bat is that she says, uses a reference that has nothing to do with her point. But the second thing, and I hope you guys are forewarned because this video will take a while. But the second thing that happens is that she makes a point that is demonstrably false. The Bible talks a lot about how to get to heaven. The Bible talks about people going to heaven often. Jesus was on the cross and he said to the thief on his side, he said, today you will be with me in paradise. That was heaven. Jesus talked about heaven in parables. He talked to the blind. He talked about Lazarus going to heaven. And he talked about Abraham and Lazarus seeing a rich man in hell. So the idea that heaven is not talked about explicitly in the Bible, I don't know where she's getting this from. But this is one of those atheist tropes where they act like all the theologies in the Bible are something that we all made up. The second, I'll continue on what she says. The second thing she says is, and I was a Christian. I think she's referring to this. She says, and I was one for more years than enough. What? All right, so I don't know what that means. Now, for some people, they think they could be a Christian and then turn it on and off again. It's like being a Republican or a Democrat. A Christian is not like that. A Christian is somebody who has dedicated their lives to following Jesus Christ. That's how I define it. Now, if you want to define it simply as somebody that was raised Christian or somebody who was once part of a Christian church, you could define it in many different ways, and those are nebulous definitions. So a Christian is somebody who has dedicated their lives to following Jesus Christ as defined in the Bible. If you're somebody who is not following that Bible, I'm not sure how you could have been a Christian for a limited amount of time. But I also know more years than enough. What does that mean? That could be 1 year. That could be 2 years. That could be 20 years. I'm not sure what this lady is referring to. She then says this. They follow the same cycle of allowable topics year over year. What allowable topics and who allows them? Now, I get it. Some churches do have this thing where they want to overemphasize certain passages. And that was what I was referring to in that video. Many churches will overemphasize the letters of Paul at the exclusion of the Old Testament or the exclusion of other writers. But that does not mean that most churches simply exclude the Old Testament or stay away from difficult topics altogether. Now, some churches go that far, but that's not most. And what I'm talking about is a modern church. In other words, a church that follows modern feelings, which is a church that is passing away. And we'll talk about that a little bit further. But when I'm doing critiques, I'm not critiquing the church as in existence. I'm critiquing modern iterations that we see this day that are flawed. That should be a difference. And I don't think that this person gets that. She then talks about the Bible referring to genocide and defending genocide. Now, this is a common argument that a lot of people will make against the Bible. It is a common mistake that many people make because what they don't understand is that in the Bible, war was always spiritual, not racial. And you may say, what? Well, let's think of this. The Bible doesn't have people going to war just to defend some racial identity. And that's where the difference is that a lot of atheists don't see. When you read the Bible, what you are reading is a history of God's people. Now, when we talk about a history of God's people, what is that? That's the right religion. Oftentimes, God's people had more going to war with people who were close to them than people that were far away. So let's think of it in this sense. A lot of times, and let's look at the rules of engagement between how they had to go to war with Benjamin versus how they went to war with Ammon or how they went to war with Canaan. It's the same rules of engagement. Now, just to break it down, in history, in the book of Judges, the people of Israel went to war with the tribe of Benjamin. And the tribe of Benjamin almost got completely wiped out. And the reason they went to war was because there was a city in Benjamin where they were pretty much doing the same thing that we see in Sodom and Gomorrah, right? They tried to sodomize men, and they harassed this woman and gang raped her. And the whole country heard about it, and they say, hey man, give these people who did this over to us so that we can execute them. And they refused. They defended those people, and they went to war over that. So when you look at how they went to war and wiped out the Benjamites, it is very similar to how they went to war with the Canaanites or how they went to war with Amalek. Spiritual war is described here. So when you look at the wars that are described in the Bible, there are many different wars that go on. Some wars are just over territory. Some wars are just king against king. But when it's a war that's endorsed by God, it's always a spiritual war. And when you see these spiritual wars, they have the same rules of engagement. So it's not a genocide. It is a religious war. Now, are these intense wars? Are these vicious wars? Yes, they are. But that's what spiritual warfare is. Because oftentimes what you're doing is you're battling with eternity at stake. You're battling with a spiritual emphasis. And so when we talk about warfare in the Bible, it's a lot more meaningful than do I get more money than the guy next to me. It's way more meaningful than that. But a lot of times when atheists will read the Bible, they will oftentimes dumb down, and let's just say it this way. They try to unspiritualize the Bible, and you really can't do that. They'll try to say, well, the only reason they left Egypt was because of this and this and this, instead of just taking the Bible at its word, that this is why they left. They wanted to worship in the way that they wanted to. They didn't want to be subject to the religion of Egypt. So when they did worship the way that they wanted to, sometimes the atheists will say, well, they just did it for cultural reasons, or they did it for this, or they did it for that. And you have to understand it in the biblical perspective. So if you're not going to read it in the sense, at least take the author's word for it, or take an author's word for, at least give him some credit, then there's no point in even reading it, right? That would be like reading a historical document and just saying, well, it's all lies. Well, then what's the point of reading it? So when you read the Bible, you have to read it with that kind of sense. And when we talk about these genocides, like I said before, these are not racial. And the reason I say it's not racial is because you see so many people who are not Jews getting into the tribes of Israel. So you look at somebody like Rahab. You look at somebody like Ruth, a whole book of the Bible. You look at somebody like Job. Job is not an Israelite. You look at a lot of these people who are not Israelites, and they are still honored. You look at somebody like Melchizedek. There are non-Jews that are still honored by Jews. It is not an issue of race. It is an issue of spirituality that they are battling over. So to put it in terms of genocide is a false assumption. She then says this. They mutilate newborn boys' penises to express a covenant that an infant cannot consent to. Now, this is something that people always bring up, and I think it's more of a European idea that circumcision is some form of mutilation. And this is an old idea. The reason it's an old idea, this is something that the Romans thought about circumcision. They didn't like it either. And this is a common European response to circumcision. That's why it makes me think this is a European idea, and it may not be. The Jenna that we have here might be just a United States citizen, but it's kind of a European idea. A lot of Germans think things like this, for example. But when you look at something like circumcision, you have to understand that circumcision is a medical practice that is accepted. And the reason it's accepted is because it's not exclusive to the Jews. When the Bible talked about circumcision, a lot of people said, well, the Jews weren't the first ones to circumcise. Well, of course they wasn't. Otherwise, would Abraham even understood what God was saying? There must have been other cultures who had been doing it. So the idea is that it's not something that's exclusive to Jews. It's something that Muslims do, something that a lot of Christians do. It's something that almost any doctor will offer a newborn. The reason they do is because it is tied historically to lower cancer rates, both for males and females in the general region. It's because the flap of skin that gets cut off is one that is normally associated with, let's just say this. The flap of skin that gets circumcised, it is known to pick up more bacteria and more dirt and things like that. And so circumcision is considered more clean, right? And that is just a fact. Now, some people can call it mutilation. You can call it whatever you want to. You can insult it however you want to. Even Paul played around with that term and said, hey, I wish they would mutilate themselves, using the term of circumcision. It is a form of mutilation, but it is mutilation for a purpose. Now, when you look at circumcision and you say, well, it was something that they couldn't consent to. Well, it was part of their cultural heritage. And one of the things you have to understand is this, that even if the infants couldn't consent to it, that's no different than today. Let me put it in these terms. We have a constitution that says consent of the governed, but we still allow the governors and the president and the officers of the law to rule over us, even though none of us born today consented to that law. When did we consent to letting this United States government rule over us? Who did? The forefathers did. They signed their names to the Constitution and they voted to accept the Constitution. We never voted for that. So how then could we consent to this government? We consented to it because our forefathers did. Our ancestors did. Well, how could we consent to follow a constitution that was done before we were even born? Well, it's the same principle. Same exact principle. Same thing as laws, right? You might say, well, I didn't agree with this law. Well, you don't have to agree with it. It was established before you were even born. Now, you may change that law, but the truth of the matter is that we don't care when you were born and whether you consented to it before. We believe in consent of the governed, as in we accept the government that our forefathers accepted. That is simply just a fact. You can't have a consent of the governed constantly. So there are a lot of things like that. I think about family names. There are a lot of family names. You didn't consent to your family name, or you didn't consent to your name. It was just given to you. You didn't get a chance to get that. Nobody, and the funny thing is when people make these arguments, they never think about all the other things that this applies to. They never think about companies. You know, if your dad owned Wendy's, now you own Wendy's. They never think about that. I didn't consent to do that. Nobody cares. Nobody argues about that. The piercings in many cultures, how you could be raised in a culture and they'll just put all these rings in your ear, do all these different things to you, even when you're an infant. Lots of things that you do as an infant, you have no choice in. What language you have, what family you'll be part of, what caste you'll be in some societies. All these things are decided before you're even born. So to then all of a sudden point at circumcision as the one that's unfair is silly. It's very silly. And it is literally just picking something that you just want to pick. It doesn't have any logic to it. Now, the next point that she makes is this. Nobody will be able to see it even unless they drop trowel. That's irrelevant. What does that have to do with anything? It has nothing to do with anything. Lots of cultures will have different signs and different things that people do. Just because people can't see it doesn't mean anything. Here's the next thing she says. They don't understand that the Bible has been added to and maimed in translation to support doctrine instead of the other way around. Now, when you talk about the Bible has been added to, what are you referring to? When you say the Bible has been added to, the Bible is remarkably whole and been preserved. When you look at the Bible and you look at it intently, right, as studied. Now, let's look at it. Let's take away the religious guise of it and think of it just as a text document. If you look at the Bible, it is remarkably preserved. All of the text is remarkably preserved. And we have families of text. And what we mean by families of text is the paper that was originally written on would have not lasted all the way to this day. So somebody had to take it and copy it. And then somebody else copied that copy. And somebody else copied that copy. And so there's a family of text that it comes from. Sometimes there will be some original, very old copy that'll turn up. We'll find it. And we will often find that the copies that we found that are ancient match the ones that we have to this day. And what that points is that there has very little been added to the Bible or taken away from it or maimed the translation or any of that stuff. The translations that we have today are very, very good. So when you look at a translation like the ESV or the NASB or even the New King James Version or the NIV, these are very, very peer-reviewed translations. These are very good translations. Are they perfect? Nothing is perfect that some man was going to do, right? But they're very, very good. Now, where will we see changes in the Bible? Well, we have a thing called textual variance. And this is something that's a little bit technical, but the idea is this, that one family of text will say of this word and another family of text will say that word. And you'll see that. And if you look in your Bible, a very good Bible will have little numbers or letters that'll talk to you about what textual variants they are. But here's the thing. When you have a textual variant, they'll often be like, for example, there's a passage that said Jacob leaned on his bed, and another one said Jacob leaned on his staff. And the idea is that both of those words in the Hebrew were very similar, and so it was simple to slip when you translated those or when you copied those. Now, if you look at that in that sense, you might say, oh, where's a mistake? But here's a question. What theological concept was changed because of that? I'll give you an easy answer. None. When you look at all the textual variants, and even you look at some passages that were added. So we give an example, like the end of Mark, or you will see some passages inserted in the book of John. There'll be passages like that that'll just be changed or added. And I don't like those changes or adds either. But we recognize where they've been added because we can look at the textual families and see where the change were. So it's not like Christians don't know about this. Now, maybe a layperson may not know about this, but people who have studied the scriptures do know about this. And the reason we're not bothered by it is because they don't impact anything that is theologically significant. In other words, there is no passage out there that says Jesus was a woman. You're not going to find that. No textual variant is going to show that. No textual variant is going to show something that says David and Jonathan had a homosexual relationship. That does not exist. So you will find textual variants, but they will not be significant to any meaning of the text. There are some that'll be mess with some numbers. So you'll have some where, for example, in one passage they'll talk about somebody killing 300, and another passage they'll say killing 500, and that happens. But that doesn't change the meaning of the text or the impact of that text. It doesn't change that. So we'll have some textual variants here and there. We'll see them. We identify where they are. Most biblical scholars know where they are. And most biblical scholars actually think they know which textual variant is the more correct choice to make. So it's just something you want to consider when you talk about textual variants. A lot of people bring that stuff up because they think that they can make some argument. And the reason that they bring this argument is because most Christians don't want to do the work to research to see whether what they're saying has any validity. Because some of you guys have so little faith that you're afraid that if you overturn something, you're going to overturn your whole faith. Well, here's what you need to do. You need to understand this, that the faith you have is rock solid. And what you have and then what you have believed in is something that will not be overturned. And so you should have no fear of researching and looking into it. At the end of the day, we are based on truth. And if we're following and researching the truth, we have nothing to fear. Now let's go on to this Jenna's comments. And I know it's taking a while, but I want to break this down. She says next that these things were changed to support doctrine instead of the other way around. What's the other way around? I don't get that, right? What's the other way around? Nobody could tell me what that means. What is the other way around? Then she says, I'm glad for that study. It shows the church is on its way to being a dusty relic of the shells of history where it belongs. No, it's not. No, it's not. It's proven what we've always known, that there are a lot of American churches that are flawed and that are leading congregations of people that I would say are not born again Christians, that are not saved, that we will not see in heaven. And that's just simply a sad fact, but it is a fact. Now, it does show that some of these mega churches will be going away because we're moving into a post-Christian society right now, where we're moving into it where seeker-friendly churches will no longer be good. Why? Because people aren't going to be seeking for them. A seeker-friendly church was one that simply made it easy for you to find them, easy for you to be a Christian. So you could get your little religion the same way you can get a little McDonald's and then go about your way. But just like McDonald's, that was the same nutritional content that you got spiritually out of these mega churches. And what happened is that as society becomes more and more anti-Christian, we will start to see that more of these mega churches will go away because people won't be seeking them. So these churches will, instead of having them be seeker friendly, they will have to be counterculture, which is the way that Christianity is meant to be. So I don't want to see churches go extinct, and they won't. You won't ever see churches go extinct because the truth won't go extinct. Here's the next point she makes. We'll continue to her second paragraph. Believe it or not, that was all her first paragraph. The second one is a lot shorter, though. And premarital sex begs the question of what is marriage? No, it doesn't. Everybody knows what a marriage is. Premarital sex does not beg that question. A lot of people use this term, begs the question. I hate when they do that because begs the question used to be a reference only to the fallacy of begging a question. And I used to love that reference, but now when people use beg the question, they just use it any old way they want to. And I always hate when people refer to things like that, but I'll leave it alone. The word matrimony comes from matter, mother. So when a woman got pregnant, that whole virgin knockup doesn't happen to everybody. So somebody was in bed before marital status began for that word to exist as a synonym for being married. All right, so now we really have to get to the IQ level of the person who was writing this. But the reason that we have to get to that is because it is. Marriage is considered consummated after sex. That's the reason that those two words became associated. When you look at the word virgin, in the Bible, the word for virgin doesn't mean that somebody never had sex. Oftentimes, the word for virgin simply means somebody that wasn't married, because there was the idea that you shouldn't be having sex before you got married. Now, it wasn't always the case, but it was commonly associated with it. And the same one for matrimony. The reason that we consider a marriage not... I just can't believe that people don't realize this. that a marriage is not consummated until the two people have had sex after they have agreed to the rights of marriage. That is something that has been the case in almost every culture in human existence. The ancient Jews had a thing where they would have a marriage, then they would go to the marriage bed, and after they got done in the marriage bed, the people would come out and they would celebrate after they came out. Now that's embarrassing. I wouldn't want to be part of that kind of culture, but that is the kind of thing they did because the sex consummated the marriage. So I just can't believe that people don't even know facts like that. But if you are watching this video, hey, give me some kudos. I just taught you something. You should have already known it though. The church wasn't interested in marriage until the 11th century. What? Now, I just can't believe this because Paul wrote his books in the 1st century. If Paul wrote his books in the 1st century and he talked extensively about marriage, look at 1 Corinthians 7. Paul talked about marriage. Before Paul, Jesus was talking about marriage. Now, Jesus was teaching around 30 AD. So Jesus was talking about marriage, and this is 1,100 years before the 11th century. So please, please, please follow your history. If Paul is not part of the church, and maybe they don't consider Paul and Jesus part of the church, and if they do, then I don't know what the church is. But then look at Malachi. Malachi was talking about marriage and divorce and how people were doing their person they married when they were young wrong by divorcing them and trying to marry somebody younger. And you look at Moses talking about marriage and the laws for marriage. So the idea that the church doesn't care about marriage, and then she follows that up by saying that churches only cared about marriage so that they could throw bastards out of the church. These bastards that these men had with all these other ladies it talks about is false. I can't find any historical reference for tossing all these bastards out of the church. And the reason that I can't is probably because it didn't happen. But I'm always open to somebody giving me some references or some kind of links. Because maybe the Catholic Church did some stuff because the Catholic Church did a lot of dirt. I ain't going to deny that. But I don't own up to any of the dirt that the Catholic Church did because I'm not part of that church. Now, it could be a reference to Deuteronomy 23:2, where it talks about children of forbidden unions are not allowed in the assembly of God. Now, what does this mean, this forbidden union? It could simply mean that somebody who had a foreign descent or somebody who was born of a relationship that wasn't approved by God could not therefore be an official in the country or an official in the temple. And that is for obvious reasons, right? You don't want somebody who's taken over the country and they don't have, they're not one of the people of God. At the same time, we'll note that many of the people of God were mixed. So you look at somebody like Obed. Well, Ruth was a Moabite. That means that he was mixed. So David had mixed ancestry. That's why when David fled, he fled to Moab, right? And it's just a lot of different things that when you look at, you'll just say, people they don't pay attention to what is really in the Bible. But this idea that something is wrong with being mixed race, it's not biblical. Then it talks about this idea that this is what she says next. Up till then, people took to housekeeping, often but not always with a party in the community. And you got this idea, all the wedding stuff, cakes, rings, signs of being owned, flowers and vows are pagan, by the way. Now, let's just talk about this. Rings are not signs of being owned. They come from the idea of dowry. And what's a dowry? A dowry is when like a man would give money to, the bride would give money to the husband's family. Why? Because women are expenses. And it's just something, let's just talk about something real quick. When we talk about marriage, why is it that we don't like bastard children, or we don't like when people give birth to bastard children? The reason we don't is because it leads to poverty more often than not. It means that somebody has put their momentary pleasure in front of the fact that there will be lives impacted by their decisions down the line. Generations could be impacted. So let's look at the black community, for example. We have a problem with all these mothers who are unwed. Why? Because if you have a single parent household, you are setting your kids up for failure more often than not. So you look at murder rates, you look at school truancy rates, you look at any statistic that is negative, single parent households will be more likely to be part of that negative number than two parent households. This is just a fact. It is something that is plaguing the black community. So when you look at somebody who is a bastard, they shouldn't be looked down upon for them. It's their parents that should be looked down upon. Now, some women don't like this because they have had kids outside of wedlock. And they say, well, how come the men are not looked down upon as much as the women? And the reason for this is simple. If a man can take care of his kids, he is considered to have fulfilled his societal obligations. So when you think about it in this sense, and Fresh and Fit have always said this, and I'll use their quote, but they'll say, for men, they are always looking for a woman where they're not troubled by her past. But women are always looking for men that have a good outlook in their future. When you are a man and you are looking for a mate, the reason that you don't want to look for a woman who already got kids and all this stuff is because, number one, you don't want to take care of another man's children. We are not wired to be that way. It doesn't matter if you believe in an evolutionary prospect, right? In the sense that a male lion will not take care of another lion's kids. He will not. He will kill all of them. And we are not that vicious as human beings, but we simply have an aversion to take care of kids that we are not responsible for. That is simply just part of male nature. But there's a second thing, and that is if you as a woman are not chaste, it is hard for the man to guarantee that the kids that he will have in the future will be his. A man wants to take care of his own kids. Is that too much to ask for? And a woman wants to be in a place where when she has kids, she will be safe. Is that too much to ask for men? We both have these natures given to us by God. And that's something that you can't reject, no matter how much societal manipulation you want to do, no matter how much you want to push feminism or you want to push secularism or you want to put the church down. That stuff you can't avoid. So anyways, this video was long, but I wanted to respond to this, Jenna. A lot of times what you guys don't understand is that when you see people respond online, you think that everybody is supposed to be this reasoned, ultra intelligent person. But most of the people who respond to me and respond to other people online, they are idiots just like this Jenna. They will come up there and just go and spew all this emotional crap. Arguments that make no sense, references to the Bible that don't exist, etc. And we have to respond to this. And you want to act like everybody who's a critic is somebody that's this super intelligent, studied doctorate. And it's not the case. So, hey, this is Zeal Brothers signing out. If you like the video, comment below.